Hi guys, welcome back. This video is going to talk about ancient Egypt, which is the third of the River Valley civilizations that we will be discussing in this unit. Make sure that you write down your notes. There will be a short quiz at the beginning of class tomorrow. If you have any questions, go back through the video, and if not, write them down and we will discuss them in class tomorrow. Let's get started. We're going to start with the geography. That's the G of the grapes of civilization. I put a map up here with all of the civilizations that we will be covering. We've already taken care of Mesopotamia. We've discussed Indus Valley, and now we're going to talk about Egypt. As you can see in the map, Egypt is in North Africa. North Africa has some natural barriers that protect the Egyptian civilization from invasion. There are mountains in the south, and that separates North Africa from South Africa. And then you have deserts that are going to be east and west of the Nile River, and that also keeps people from invading them. They're not completely isolated, however, they do have contact with people from Mesopotamia, and they have contact with people from the Indus Valley at this time. The Nile River is essential to the survival of this civilization. And if you don't know about the Nile River, it's the longest river in the world. It runs from north to south. It's the only river in the world that does that, and it empties into the Mediterranean Sea. It serves as a highway for the Egyptians. The gift of the Nile is the fact that the river floods annually, making the soil fertile. Every time that the river floods, it deposits a lot of minerals into the ground, making it nice and rich for agriculture, and so this is known as the gift of the Nile. But the Nile has other gifts for the Egyptians, including papyrus, which grows along the riverbanks, and that is used for almost everything in Egyptian life. They use it even for writing. Water is very important for cooking and bathing, and also for irrigating the crops. And there's a lot of fish and waterfowl. Those are birds that live near the water. And that also helps provide food to the Egyptians. And there's wild vegetables and bird eggs that can be found along the riverbanks, which also can be eaten and sustain the population. The Egyptian religion at this time was polytheistic. There were over 2,000 different gods that Egyptians worshipped. And they were very mythical people. They believed in magic. They did believe in an afterlife as well. Death was not the last stage of life. You went on to someplace better after death. The Book of the Dead contains spells, charms, and passwords that enabled the Egyptians to get to the afterlife if they had access to these special magical charms and spells. And they also believed in mummification, and that is the preservation of the body after death. People who were poor would put bodies out in the desert to dry out, but people who were rich, like the pharaohs, the kings and queens, they went a little above and beyond and had their bodies mummified. And right now, through this video, I'm going to walk you through the steps of the mummification procedure. So it starts by taking the brain out of the skull. They do this with a long hook that they insert through the nose, and then they break the brain up and pull it out. Then they remove the organs. They remove the lungs, the heart, the stomach, the intestines, and the liver, and they put them in jars with natron salt to dry them out. Then the body needs to be dehydrated, so they cover it in salt as well, and all the moisture is sucked out of the body, but it remains like that for 40 days until it gets completely dry. Once it's been completely dry, they can insert the heart back in there after they wash out all of the salt. They replace the heart, they stuff the body with materials to fill in those vacant spaces, and then they pour resin over the body, and that is going to make the bandages stick to it. Then they begin to wrap the body, and they put amulets and jewelry on the wraps, and they cover it with a mask, and they put it inside of a coffin called a sarcophagus. and then the coffin is put inside of a tomb. That is the mummification process for the royalty during the Egyptian times. Alright, so let's get back to our PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay, so let's talk about the Egyptian achievements during this time period. Medicine was something that they dabbled in, and they made a lot of advances in surgery. They were the first to perform surgeries on people, and then eventually the Greeks and the Romans are going to continue some of the things that the Egyptians began. Pyramids are also important to this culture. They served as tombs for the Egyptian people that were built during the Old Kingdom. We'll discuss those in more detail in just a second. They were the first to develop the 365-day calendar that is based on their farming season, and it's very similar to what we have today. And they also had a system of symbols and pictures that they used to communicate with, and those were called hieroglyphics. Now, they were difficult for archaeologists to decipher, and for a long time they didn't know what all of these symbols and pictures meant. And it wasn't until they discovered the Rosetta Stone, which is this one that's here, and that helped to translate all of these symbols. And now archaeologists are able to read what all of these symbols mean. In Egyptian society, the civilization was ruled by dynasties. Dynasties are ruling families, kind of like they're monarchies that we have in Europe. In Egypt, they were called dynasties. And there were about 30 dynasties that ruled during the ancient Egyptian times. The leader of the dynasty is known as the pharaoh, that is the Egyptian king or queen. There were some queens, Cleopatra was one of them, but most of the pharaohs were men. And the pharaoh owned everything, and I mean everything. You didn't own your house, you didn't own your clothing, you didn't own your jewelry. Everything belonged to the pharaoh. He just let you borrow it. Each pharaoh also had an army, a police force, and many ministers and government officials that helped him rule the empire. His most important advisor was the vizier, and he's the right-hand man that kept the pharaoh informed of everything that was going on in his kingdom. And we divide Egypt into 3 kingdoms based on the behavior of the pharaohs during those time periods, and they are the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. During the Old Kingdom, pharaohs were buried in pyramids. But the pyramids were easy to locate, and they were being robbed because they had a lot of treasures in them. They became too troublesome and too expensive for pharaohs to keep up, and so they stopped burying their dead in tombs. In pyramids. During the Middle Kingdom, the pharaohs started to be buried inside of hidden tombs, and they were all over Egypt. Not all tombs have been found today. There are still some that are still hidden, but archaeologists are still digging for them. And then eventually we have the New Kingdom. And the New Kingdom pharaohs were actually buried also in hidden tombs, but they were all buried in one geographical area, which is known as the Valley of Kings. And during the New Kingdom, Egypt became a world power. And here is a chart with a little more information about the Old, Middle, and New Kingdoms. Again, during the Old Kingdom, the pharaohs had a very organized, centralized state. They built enormous tombs, those are the pyramids, and there were a lot of power struggles. They had crop failures, and the cost of the pyramids bankrupted the kingdom, and they collapsed. So the Middle Kingdom comes around, and they have a very corrupt government, and people rebelled frequently. They did develop the irrigation system for farming, but eventually the Hittites invade and they conquer. And then we have the New Kingdom. Those pharaohs created a very large empire, and they traded with the lands along the Eastern Mediterranean and the Red Sea. They declined when the Nubians and other peoples invaded. In Egyptian economy, trade was very important. They traded gold, papyrus, linen, and grain for things like cedar, wood, ebony, copper, iron, ivory, and lapis lazuli, which is a blue stone that they prized very much. And the merchants were highly respected citizens because they brought a lot of wealth to Egypt. Some of the professions included scribes, craftsmen, or artists, and those are people who could move up the social ladder. But most of the jobs that people did were inherited. So if your father was a farmer, you'd be a farmer, and so forth. Anyone could join the army, and so that was also a career option for a lot of people. This is a pyramid that shows the social structure of the Egyptian people. At the top you have the pharaoh, followed by his government officials, then his soldiers. Scribes, again, they're pretty high up in the social ladder, and then there are merchants, artisans, farmers, and at the bottom you have slaves. Women in Egyptian society were not completely equal to men, but they did have many rights. They could divorce their husbands, they could get jobs outside of the home, and they could even own property or business. Education was mostly reserved for boys. Some boys went to school, some were educated at home, and girls were taught at home. They did not get to go to school. Jewelry was worn by everybody in Egyptian society. Men, women, and children of all classes wore jewelry. And clothing was made of linen, cotton, and woven reeds. And almost everybody wore makeup. They lined their eyes with black coal, and the purpose was to protect their eyes from the sun and the sand and the flies. Alright, so that concludes our lecture on the Egyptian society. Again, if you have any questions, make sure to go back through the video or write them down and we can discuss them in class tomorrow. Thanks for watching.